We're back.
In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Our Lady of Lourdes,
Pray for us.
Our Lady of La Salette,
Pray for us.
Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal,
Pray for us.
Saint Bernadette,
Pray for us.
Saint Catherine Labouré,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Saint Helena,
Pray for us.
our patron saints and guardian angels.
Pray for us.
In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. So we're going to talk a little bit about France because it's good to know why France. Why is France the eldest daughter of the church? Well, maybe you're not sure, don't know the history. How did the faith come to France? Well, according to tradition, the faith came to France because, as you know, when the persecution of the Jews, the dispersal that took place at the time of the apostles, Lazarus, Mary Magdalene, and Martha, and some of the early Christians who were fled when the dispersal took place, they got on a boat without a rudder or without a sail, and they just kind of floated, and they miraculously ended up on the shores of France. And it's believed that Saint Lazarus and Martha and Mary brought with them the relics of Saint Anne. That's why there's been this devotion to Saint Anne in France from apostolic times. It was even, for a while, her relics were lost for almost 800 years. And it was through a miraculous vision that Charlemagne had that they found these relics of Saint Anne from the 1st century to the 800s when Charlemagne was king, I think it was. So that's how St. Anne's devotion got to France, and then of course from France it came to Canada, and that's why we have the shrine of St. Anne de Beaupré in Canada. And so Lazarus, Martha, and Mary Magdalene came to France. Tradition names Lazarus as the first bishop of Marseille, and while Martha, she worked some kind of a miraculous, she tamed a terrible beast near a town called Tarascon. And to this day, or at least until the French Revolution took place, which destroyed a lot of Catholic shrines and memorials, pilgrims visited their tombs at the Abbey of Vézelay in Burgundy and the Abbey of the Trinity at Vendôme. A phylactery was said to contain a tear shed by Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus. And the Cathedral of Autun, not far away, is dedicated to Lazarus as Saint Lazare. And it says that the first written records of Christians in France date from the 2nd century. That's the 2nd century, of course, is the 101 to 199. That's the 2nd century. When Irenaeus detailed the deaths of 90-year-old Bishop Pothinus of Lugdunum, which is now Lyon, and the other martyrs in the year 177 during the persecutions of Lyon. So the faith has been in France from the time of the apostles, because Lazarus was a contemporary of Christ himself. So that's how long the faith has been in France. And in 496, Remigius baptized Clovis I, who was converted from paganism to Catholicism. And Clovis I is considered the founder of France. So you might say it's the first Catholic country, because even the Slavic nations didn't enter into the as their kings until the 900s or 800s. So for 496, France is king. So was a Catholic nation. He made himself the ally and protector of the papacy and his predominantly Catholic subjects. So the faith has been in France, and it's the eldest daughter of the church. I mean, the faith was there before England. It was there before Italy. Well, not Italy, but Italy, of course. But it's probably contemporary, because Peter went to Rome, and Paul went to Rome, and Lazarus went to France. So it's contemporary to that, And so the faith, France, it's amazing. If you go to France today, there's still strong vestiges of the faith there. And of course, they brought with them the devotion to Saint Anne, the mother of our Lord. So there's always been a devotion to Our Lady there. The fleur de lis was a sign of Our Lady, was part of their flag until, of course, the French Revolution just did so much to wipe out a lot of the Catholic culture and symbolism. So the French Revolution, of course, took place in 1789. And I wouldn't celebrate Bastille Day, because that's really when the churches, that began the persecution of the church. Thousands of people, priests, were slaughtered. There's a story of one of our Franciscan martyrs that a few hundred priests were in this monastery and they were all butchered, and that the blood was running down the streets. That's how bad it was. So that Masonic French Revolution, because it was Masonic, it was a secret society, the Masons, did so much. It was really a war against the church and the divine order established, not only because the church and, of course, the king was so closely united. The church is the one who blessed the king. You might crown the king. It was not that the church, but it was like it became a certain sense to remind the king that his authority came from God. The Lord said all authority comes from God. So the kings were blessed and you might say anointed in that sense, or crowned by the church as a kind of just as a service that the church did. And so there was always this great, if you look at medieval France and the beautiful cathedrals that they built and the Catholic culture there, truly it was, as some say, the historians say, it's misnamed. The Dark Ages were not dark and the Enlightenment was not enlightened. Because it's really the opposite. Enlightenment was the Dark Ages. That was the age of faith, and the Enlightenment was the introduction of all these Masonic and secular, humanistic ideas and all the isms that are affecting us today. With the French Revolution is really the model of all revolution. It's even worse, which, of course, the French Revolution got its ideas from the American Revolution. The reason why the American Revolution wasn't so anti-Catholic was because there wasn't hardly any Catholics here when the Catholic Church had no real presence in the New World. Didn't have that, or at least in the 13 colonies, so they didn't really have to go out and wage war on the church. But really, the Masonic Revolution of France, they knew that they had to get rid of or to destroy the influence of the church. And so that was really it was a war against the church in many ways, and the only ones that really fought against the Masonic Revolution, and they almost defeated the government forces of the Masons in the French Revolution, was in the Vendée. These were Catholic farmers and peasants they didn't have guns, they used their farm implements and went to war and almost beat the French government's army. They had done so much to defend their faith, because they weren't gonna allow someone to subject them to the cruelty of the French Revolution. They were going to resist it as much as they could. And it's interesting that the Vendée region was the area that St. Louis de Montfort preached. So he preached total consecration to Our Lady. It was the only place in France that really put up a great resistance to the French Revolution. So I would think that their Marian devotion had a lot to do with the fact that it made them heroic men and women. So the French Revolution, though, brought in, of course, the Masonic philosophy, deism, which is the philosophy behind Freemasonry, is this idea, this notion that God had created the world and set it in motion, and from that point on, no longer does he have any more influence into the world. So really what you find with Freemasonry and the French Revolution was the denial of supernatural. And you'll find that what is the biggest problem in the Western world today? The denial of the supernatural. There is no God. There's no thing as such as grace. There are no miracles.
There's technology.
And we are the captains of our fate. We are the ones that, by our choices, which is some aspects of truth to that, but that's not, we don't just determine things on our own. There's God's will, and we can't, the only self-made man is a mistake. But So that's one of the problems of the French Revolution, social tyranny. I mean, all the revolutions, the communist revolutions, that they all took as their model of the French Revolution. You can trace all the revolutions that have taken place in 1789, whether it be the Spanish Revolution, which was totally another persecution again of the church. So many Catholics and priests and religious were murdered in the Spanish Revolution. Then, of course, the Russian Revolution, Communist Revolution, all these had as their model this first revolution, which was to throw off. They say that the French Revolution was to throw off the authority of the king. That I want to be the captain of my own self-governing. But throwing off the king, though, was in one sense throwing off, the divinely established order of the morality that came along with the church, because they attacked the church when they attacked. They didn't just attack the monarch; they attacked the church. So they didn't want that. So tyranny, and of course, what was the French Revolution's motto? Equality, liberty, and fraternity. And there was none of those. There was no equality, there was no fraternity, and there was no liberty. It was one of the most vicious. In French, it was equality, liberty, and fraternity. And maybe it was in those. I don't know if I have the order right, but that was the three, whether they were there or not. But there wasn't equality, there wasn't fraternity, and there wasn't liberty. It was tyranny, and it was licentiousness. That's the whole thing. It was. They even desecrated the Notre Dame by having this prostitute on the altar and everything. It was called her something about the wisdom or something. I can't remember what it was, but it was all very much revolt against the social order and the moral order, and they even changed the calendar, and they changed the weeks, the days of the week. They made not Sunday the first day of the week, but Monday. And that's what the communists did too. And they even made Monday the first day of the week. And someone I showed this, I came back one time from Poland with a calendar that I got at Niepokalanów, of all places. And they still had some of this vestige. What they had on the calendar was a religious calendar, but they had Monday as the first day of the week. And the lady I showed it to was Polish. She said, that's terrible. I said, what? Because I didn't even know. She goes, they are still using, the communist way of reckoning the days on the calendar, putting Monday before Sunday, making Sunday the last day of the week. She said, they should know better than that. They're a religious calendar. They should make it the way. Sure, the first day of the week is Sunday. So that all originated from the French Revolution, this whole idea that they tried to do everything they could to somehow wipe away any kind of Christian or Catholic vestiges in society. And of course, they wanted the priest to take an oath, which would to make the government, that they'd be a servant of the government. And that's why most of them were killed. And of course, the only way the French Revolution, if you ever have a chance to read a book, it's an excellent book, Dr. Warren Carroll's, The Cross and the Guillotine. And it's an excellent account of the French Revolution from a Catholic perspective, and showing that, of course, how did the French Revolution finally end? Was when the Carmelite nuns of Compiègne volunteered, said that they would give their lives as sacrifice to end the French Revolution. And they were arrested, taken into the Bastille, which was the prison, and they had their habits on, and you couldn't have any religious symbols, so they made them take off their habits and wear these milkmaids or maids, women peasant garb while they're in prison. So on the day when it came for them to be guillotined, they said, we don't want them to take those peasant garb with, because we want some other prisoners to wear them. We don't want them to take them to the guillotine. So I said, what will they wear? I said, we still have their habits. So they went to the guillotine wearing their habits. And that was a surprise, because the people were, one of the things that you didn't see when they could guillotine a priest, where they wouldn't allow them to be guillotined wearing their clerics or whatever. They'd try to They didn't want any religious symbols. But here, these ladies, there was, how many were there? Like 20 maybe? They were all in the wagons wearing their Carmelite habits. The people were shocked because they didn't realize until they saw these nuns going to be guillotined that how
It
the
was nuns.
the
that were
bru-
being
yeah,
guillotined.
it was the brutality of it all. And so they were guillotined on July, I think it was the day after Our Lady of Mount Carmel. But it's interesting how they fulfilled also the scapular promise. They were died wearing their scapulars.
And didn't they die singing? the
Yeah, they
Te
died
Deum?
singing the Te Deum, and they started off, I think, was either the novice went 1st, and then they went in order of profession, being guillotined. And the French Revolution ended shortly after that. It was the most brutal. The reign of terror, they called it. So that really did a lot to affect. So with the French Revolution, it was like the prototype, as I said, for all modern revolution. It introduced rationalism, which is the only thing is reason. There's no faith. Scientism, it really exalted science as being, the explanation of everything. Atheism, hedonism, socialism, communism, all these isms, came from the French Revolution. And even you might say it just did a lot to affect. Really, it became like the prototype of the modern secular state, which is not separation of church and state is not something that the church is taught against. There's no such thing as a secular state. The state too has to be governed by moral principles, and religion has to be a part of that guiding force. The state is not somehow autonomous from all other outside authority. Really, when you separate religion from the state becomes it takes over religion. And we can see that throughout history, that the biggest persecutor of the church has usually been the state, that is not at all governing by religious principles. So I think that's why all these apparitions then, history, so 1789, that took place. So right away, the first apparition, Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal, 1830. So it's just short after Napoleon and all that, So 1830, as Rue de Bat, Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal. 1846, La Salette. And there was another revolution in France, 1848, which reestablished the secular state, because for a while there they kind of went back to, it was like a Catholic revival. And then there was another revolution in 1848, which finally established the modern French Republic, which is nothing to be celebrated. And then, of course, Lourdes, 1858. But you'll see the messages that these apparitions all, in some way, had some expression of the supernatural, which helped further foster also, in one sense, something what we're going to get to here, and that is where you can see, it might say they're all kind of like common elements with the first apparition of Our Lady, which was on Mount Carmel in 800 and some BC. And of course, that puts us right into the time of the prophet Elijah. In 800 BC, it was the time of the king Ahab, who was the king of Israel. As you know, after Solomon died, the kingdom of Israel was split up. 10 tribes went to Israel. I think 2 remained with Judah. So that there was a king of Judah and a king of Israel. And at the time of Ahab, he was the king of Israel. And he, of course, invited the pagan prophets into the kingdom because he married Jezebel. And Jezebel, it's interesting, the name Jezebel means chaste one. But in her native language of Phoenician, it meant chaste one, but she was hardly anything but chaste. She brought with her the 450 prophets of Baal and another 400 prophets of Astarte. She brought these 800 prophets into the kingdom. And Ahab, who was supposed to be, as the king of Israel, was supposed to be also a religious leader in one sense, was supposed to make sure that the kingdom of Israel would remain faithful to the God of Israel. And because they felt in some way that the king was appointed by God to be like a custodian of the faith. And so he invited all this paganism into the kingdom. And so God sent the prophet Elijah, to say, Ahab, because you have apostatized, because you've not been a good servant of the Lord and kept the kingdom faithful to God, you're going to be struck with a punishment. It will not rain until I give the command. So it was like, and he disappeared. God whisked him away, took him somewhere, and Ahab went looking for him for 3.5 years. He was looking for him to kill him. And all the while, so it took 3.5 years though, and they still hadn't gone away from the paganism. So that's how really rooted and committed Ahab, or he had no backbone or something, that there was so bad, the drought, that they were looking and scrounging, trying to find food for the animals to feed them. And the people, were also probably starving because they didn't have any rain. And as you know, God took the prophet Elijah, and during the time of the drought, took him and sent him up to the widow of Zarephath, who took care of him. Miraculously, his flour of oil, or the jar of oil and the flour never ran out in those time that he spent with her. So it was a miraculous divine providence taking care of them. Eventually, though, he went back to Carmel, and he was in the cave there in hiding. And of course, Ahab sent troops out to find the king, find the prophet. And they did find him, but they didn't respect the prophet. They didn't approach him with the proper reverence, and the prophet called down fire, and he destroyed a group of 50. They were burned to a crisp. Finally, another group came, and they were burned to a crisp. The third one finally was led by a man named Obadiah, I think it was his name, something like that. And he was a believer. And so he said, please, I don't want to be burned. Would you please come back with me? Because the king wants to see you. So because he was kind and respectful to the prophet of God, they weren't burned, and he went back. And that's when we see in the book in the book of Kings, Ahab says, there you are, you troublemaker. And isn't it interesting? The one who was causing the trouble was not the one who was upholding the law of God. And that's what he said. It's not me who's causing the trouble, it's you, because of your apostasy, because you're not being faithful to God. You're the ones causing the trouble. And isn't that like today, though? People think that it's the Catholic believers who are causing all the... You're the problem. You don't respect us homosexuals or not wanting to have our behavior or our abortion. You're the ones that are causing the problems. No, it's not. It's you who are breaking God's law that's causing all of the problems. And so Elijah said to Ahab, to prove to you that who is the true God of Israel, let's have a contest on Mount Carmel. You bring all the prophets of Baal with you, and let's meet on Mount Carmel, and we'll have a contest to show who is the true God of Israel. So Ahab agreed, and so that's where we come to the book of the Kings with the famous contest on Mount Carmel, where Elijah says to the prophets of Baal, you take a bull, and you kill it, and you put it on your altar, and you call on your God, and I will make a sacrifice, a bull, and put it on my altar. I will call it, and whoever answers, whichever God answers by fire, is the true God of Israel. So they said, agreed. They agreed to that. So he said, you can go first since there's more of you. So he let the pagan prophets sacrifice their bull on an altar, and they started probably at the beginning of the day, probably at daybreak, and till about noontime. And they had been jumping up and down. They were cutting themselves because they thought maybe if God saw that they were bleeding, that their God would come to them. And so Elijah taunted them, and he said, maybe your God has gone on a journey, or maybe he's even gone to the bathroom, and he can't answer you right now because he's indisposed. And so he finally, it was noontime, said, all right, you've had your chance. Your God hasn't answered. Now it's my turn. So then he sacrificed his bull. He made an altar. He dug a ditch around it, and then he put water on it. Now you wonder, where did he get the water? Because it was a drought for so long. But But he had enough water that he put so much water on that sacrifice that it was even flowing out of the ditch. Now, why did he put water on it? Well, one thing was he wanted to prove that it wasn't being done by any human trickery, because he didn't trust the pagan prophets either. He was keeping an eye on them, that they weren't going to do something to trick. But he wanted to prove that it was nothing that he was doing, so he made it so wet that if it was going to start on fire, God would really have to do a big miracle to do it. And so, what did he do? He just said, Lord, show the people that you are the true God of Israel and that I am your prophet. And of course, fire came down and consumed not only the sacrifice, but the altar and even the water in the ditch. Everything